The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. For several years, Seattle pediatrician Dr. Melvin Morse has studied near-death experiences of children. It's a subject that can provoke deep discomfort among some of his colleagues and among those of us who shy away from the topics of death, the existence of a human soul, or the possibilities for what might lie ahead once our lives are over. Dr. Morse explores all of these subjects in his new book, Closer to the Light, Learning from the Near-Death Experiences of Children. Welcome to Upon Reflection.
Well, thank you very much.
What is a near-death experience?
A near-death experience is what happens to people who come to the point of clinical death and then are resuscitated by our medical technology. The reason we're hearing so much about these experiences now is because we've had the medical technology for the past 20 years to be able to resuscitate people whose hearts have stopped beating and they've stopped breathing spontaneously, which is what I call clinical death. And what these people tell us is that they get a glimpse into what the dying process is like. They say that at the time that it is thought that they are dead, when they are lying there with their pupils fixed and dilated and they seem to be dead, that they actually feel they are floating out of their physical body. They can hear what nurses and doctors are saying, they can see what's going on around their body, and then they enter into a world of darkness. Usually they feel they're going down a long tunnel, or maybe it's a dark passageway or something like that. And at the end of that passageway is a beautiful light. And it's not just some kind of spasm of the optic nerve, but it's a light that they associate with love and feelings of peace and release. One boy said to me, there was a lot of good things in that light.
You have had a number of the children that you've worked with in your studies draw pictures for you to try to describe with a drawing what their experiences was like. And we have a number of those pictures. Let's take a look at them and have you tell the story.
And I'll go through the near-death experience in sequence so you can get a better feeling from it from children who have drawn these pictures themselves. Now this is a 10-year-old girl who nearly died of a diabetic coma at Seattle Children's Hospital. And what we are is we're looking down at her body. She felt that during the time that she was documented as being clinically dead, that she was floating on the ceiling. And we're looking down at her. We see her there with her pigtails. And then on the bottom of the picture there, you can see a doctor with a green mask who's attending her bedside. Now, I love this picture because people say to me, well, can't they kind of invent this stuff from TV or whatever? But you notice that there's no IV in her body. And I think that whenever I see somebody sick in a hospital on TV, they always have an IV. And I went back and I checked her medical records and I discovered that in fact, when she was resuscitated, they were not able to get an IV into her.
But she did draw the mask. And she's so much bigger than the doctor.
I think that's interesting too. And then here is the tunnel that we're talking about. Now this story is going to startle you, and I know you'll want to come back to it later, but I'll tell you now that this is a boy who at 9 months had a near-death experience. And he is remembering it several years later, and he draws a picture. In the bottom left part of the screen there, you can see the dark tunnel, and then he is headed towards a brilliant and beautiful light, which is at the top of the screen. Here's another example of a tunnel. This is a boy who nearly died after having a tonsillectomy. And his heart stopped beating while he was in the operating room because of an anesthetic reaction. And again, you see this long tunnel and then the brilliant, in this case, a rainbow
lots of colors.
light. So there you have that long tunnel and then a brilliant light at the end of it. Many times children say they have spirit guides which help them to this light, to this heavenly realm. And this girl, who nearly died at a community swimming pool, she said that she was in the tunnel and it was all dark and she was scared. And then the figure on the left is a woman named Elizabeth who came to her and said, "I will help you." And when she came to take her hand, the tunnel became lit up with a brilliant light, and the two of them walked together to a place that she perceived was heaven. And here's an example of that heavenly realm. This is a 5-year-old girl who nearly died of bacterial meningitis. Now, I love this. I love the 5-year-old's vision of Jesus. It looks more like Santa Claus.
Or a snowman.
Exactly. But this is the Jesus of the red hat. She says that she went to heaven, that she talked with Jesus. There's 3 angels in the picture, and she said there was even dead people waiting to be reborn in this heavenly realm.
Detail in these pictures is just amazing.
It's incredible, to see. So many times the children themselves can't really describe what's going on, but they're able to draw it better. Now, Marcia, everybody is saying to me, well, these experiences are so religious, and the children are talking about sitting in Jesus' lap and such as that. Now, here's a 10-year-old girl who comes from a non-religious family background. She has no religious training at all. And notice the 3 figures on the left side, similar to the 3 figures we saw earlier, but she said to me that these 3 figures were doctors. I said, doctors? Well, if every child is saying they sat on Jesus' lap, I guess I would be a little suspicious, but I'd never heard of doctors before. So I said to her, well, how did you know they were doctors? Well, they were really tall, and they were all dressed in white, and they had light bulbs in their bodies. and this is this picture here shows this final stage of the near-death experience, the decision to return to the body. And she said that these doctors told her to press a button on a box at her bedside, that if she pressed the green button, she would never be with her family again. And she was frightened of that possibility. So she pressed the red button and returned to consciousness.
Now, looking at those pictures and reading some of the stories, you can't help but be struck by the similarities between what these children are describing in death and birth. The fact that there's a floating quality when you're in the womb, there's the long tunnel, you come out to the light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And people such as Carl Sagan have speculated that near-death experiences are nothing more than some kind of reactivated birth memory. That, whenever we're stressed, we sort of take a symbolic trip back to the womb, and we just sort of wish that we were back in the womb, and that somehow that birth experience of going down a tunnel into a brilliant light is the explanation for near-death experiences. As a pediatrician, I guess I'm not terribly convinced by that. First of all, when infants are born, they're not going down the vaginal canal with their eyes, looking straight at them. Actually, their head is flexed and they can't see anything. Their head is tucked in, and they are not looking down a dark tunnel. And nor is the bright, brilliant light of the birthing experience anything like the light that these children describe. The testimony from these children is very clear. They feel that this light is a light of love and of warmth, in a sense of unconditional love that they've never felt on this earth. I'm not convinced that coming out of the womb into the operating theater, being toweled off and handled roughly, and
slapped on your bottom,
right, and having your foot stuck, and and all these kinds of things would generate feelings of love and unconditional warmth, and such as that in the infants.
It's one of the striking qualities of the near-death experience they describe is the fact that it's so hard for them to make the decision to come back off. And they come back out of a sense of responsibility to those around them. But the feeling is so pleasant, it was very hard for them to return.
I agree that that's just a really interesting aspect of the near-death experience, is that they at least state over 50% of the time that they make a conscious decision to return to their bodies. And others, 25% of the time, say they were told to come back. One boy was told me that he was told, "Go back, Bobby, you have a job to do." So in the great majority of cases, these critically ill patients felt they were either told or decided to return to their body. Now, I want you to think about who these patients are. These patients are real-life flatliners. They are people who only have 1 in 1,000 chance of living, given their medical circumstances. And it's kind of interesting, why them? You know, why them out of the 999 others who are in similar circumstances who go on to die? And yet when they come back, they say to us, oh yes, I was told to come back, or I was told it wasn't my time yet, or I was told I had to hug my mother, or I had to be with my family.
When you look at all of these different case studies, are there qualities that make the people who have these experiences more like each other than the general population? Do they share certain qualities, certain characteristics?
In my own study of children, I have not found that to be the case. When I study these children, they seem to be just like any child to me. When we do psychological profiles on them and get their past medical histories and such as that, we find them just to be average, normal American children. Specifically, they are not from greater religious backgrounds. You know, they're not all born-again Christians or deeply devout religious families. They don't seem to have any tendency towards fantasy, or they're not children who are prone to making up unusual stories. They really just seem like your normal, average American kids. But I'm aware that some people have studied near-death experiences in adults and have said that these adults are fantasy-prone individuals. I'll just have to say that in my experience of studying children, that has not been the case.
Now, when you tell these stories, relate them to your colleagues at the University of Washington or your colleagues in the medical community at large, what's the reaction? Do they believe you?
Well, of course they believe me, because our study was so well done. We spent several years just designing the scientific underpinnings of our study of near-death experiences. And before I wrote my book, I published 3 articles in the American Medical Association's pediatric journal. So obviously, to get that kind of mainstream acceptance for this kind of a wacky topic, we really had to, earn the respect of our medical colleagues. But on the other hand, obviously, this is an unusual topic. People whistle the theme song to the Twilight Zone when they see me coming sometimes. And, we have created some controversy. It's about death. And even though hospitals are where most Americans die nowadays, the subject of death is the last American taboo. Children, listen to this. This is to really put this in light. Children have said to me things like, Dr. Morse, don't tell my parents I'm going to die. And this is a child who we hadn't even told was going to die. I mean, we think we're hiding, the facts of life or of death from these children. But, when they have a near-fatal disease such as cancer, very often they themselves know when they're going to die. And so why would a child say that? Don't tell my parents. It's because
they want to protect them.
Exactly. And they know that talking about death and their impending death is something that just is very upsetting to people. When a fatal diagnosis is made, when we all know, as doctors and nurses, that someone is going to die, time motion studies have documented that doctors, nurses, and family members spend less time at the bedside. So obviously, when we come in with our research and we say, wait a minute, dying people are not just kind of quietly checking out into oblivion, but they're having a wonderful spiritual experience, then we're assaulting the very taboos that we have built up around death in our society. And of course, like any good research, our research has been very controversial.
Let me ask you, are near-death experiences always positive?
Absolutely not. The near-death experience, to me, the hallmark of the experience is the sensation of leaving the physical body, going down a tunnel, and then entering into a bright light. But then each person brings to the experience elements from their own life. I'll give you an example of this. Many adults report hellish or disturbingly awful experiences as part of their near-death experience.
So I mean, they run into people that they had sort of hoped that they had seen the last of, that come back again?
Well, they have sometimes a judgment scene. Sometimes they feel that they're held morally accountable. One man said to me, this is what he said. He said, hell was having to relive the moral mistakes I made in my life. And so as adults, I hear these kinds of disturbing hellish visions that I feel come from the individual themselves. Now, children don't seem to have that, and that's why I called my book Closer to the Light, because children, the average child says to me, wow, it was really weird. I was floating out of my body, and then I saw a beautiful light, and I thought, forget my body, I just want to be with that light, but it couldn't have really happened. You know, that's the kind of typical thing a child will say to me, and they just don't seem to have that experience of hell. But listen to what they do have. Children frequently report living teachers as part of the experience.
An example?
Well, the child that we saw earlier who had nearly died of a diabetic coma, she said that she floated out of her body, and then she was surrounded by her classmates and her teachers. And I think the reason for that is that part of this experience comes from within us, and part of this experience seems to be this light that comes from, I don't know where it comes from, but not somewhere, somewhere else. And that just as adults may have hellish visions, children incorporate familiar experiences from their own lives. And an 8-year-old child is just crazy about their teacher, and it doesn't surprise me that their teacher might show up in the experience. One boy told me a pet was in the experience. He said he was in the tunnel and that 2 family pets came, and he says, and they were nagging me back to my body. That's what he said to me. That
they weren't ready for him to go yet.
Yeah, the pets were the ones that sort of decided that he was to return.
Why did you decide to study this?
Well, I worked as a pediatrician since 1980, and I particularly worked in critical care medicine. I worked here for Airlift Northwest, which serves Seattle Children's Hospital from Alaska and Montana and the area. And I just happened to have the opportunity of working with so many critically ill children. And I have resuscitated dozens and dozens of children who were at the point of clinical death. And I just happened to come across a girl that had this experience. She was 7 years old, and she nearly drowned in a community swimming pool. And her pupils were what we call fixed and dilated, meaning that she had brain death for over 19 minutes. So by standard medical technology, she should have been dead. It was miraculous that she was even successfully resuscitated. And then to hear her tell me things like, I was floating out of my body. I saw a tube coming out of my nose. And to tell me all the details of her own resuscitation was extraordinary.
When a child tells this story, what's the reaction of parents and the people around them?
Unfortunately, it is not, it's not as you'd like it to be. Many times children, first of all, don't tell anybody. One little girl said to me, well, I didn't think you were supposed to be able to talk to Jesus. And what she meant by that was that, people who talk to Jesus are crazy. And over half of the children that I interviewed had never even told their parents about this experience. So they are reluctant to discuss it. They think that they're crazy. They think that people won't believe them. They think people will laugh at them. For example, one boy, when he was in 3rd grade, his teacher asked them to tell a story about the most exciting and memorable experience that ever happened to them. They were supposed to get up and talk about something interesting in their life. So he got up and told about his near-death experience. He was sent home from school for his trouble. And the teacher told him, I didn't want you to just make up something. I wanted something that really happened to you. And he was devastated by that. Even now as a young adult, his eyes sort of well up with tears because it was real to him. These experiences are real experiences.
What kind of difference can it make for the people who stay behind, for the parents, the family, the friends, if they can accept this? Take the child at their word.
At their word, yeah. Listen to children. That's what I'm advocating is, we as doctors and nurses, and health professionals, we have got to take the stethoscopes out of our ears and start listening. And what I see is too often we trivialize or dismiss these experiences. And many parents have said to me, she's always making up these kinds of stories. One parent told me after the child told a beautiful near-death experience, floating out of the body, seeing a beautiful rainbow. And the mom said to me, I just thought it was because she had a high fever. But what we don't understand, and what my research documented, is that these experiences happen to dying people. I believe everyone, when they die, will have this experience. So therefore, the significance of this experience is for people to start listening to them, to bring back the deathbed scene, to reverse the isolation which is occurring to dying people now, that we talked about earlier, to reverse that, and for people to come in and hear what's going on in the dying person's life. I believe that that'll allow the dying person to take control. But more importantly, what you were asking me is that these experiences have the seed of healing of the terrible grief that we feel when we're confronted with the death of a child or of a parent or of anyone. And I think when a child says, I'm on a rocket ship to the moon, we should understand that at least the dying process has been a beautiful and spiritual one for them.
One of the reasons I asked was that a few years ago I was at the bedside of a friend who was dying. And when he died, and in fact, as he was dying, the last couple of days of his life, you could feel it was almost like a tide going out. And when he died, the pull was very strong, and almost like the children talk about how hard it is to come back. Mm-hmm. You almost wanted to go with. You could feel it, and it was very positive and very powerful. And it would seem that it could be more comforting to people to know that death has this. It has the potential of being this as well as the frightening experience that it seems to be for all of us.
And that's why I wrote my book, is to let people know what the process of dying is. These children that have had this experience are no longer afraid to die. They don't have that fear of death anymore. And I think that when a parent knows, obviously a near-death experience can never take away the pain of losing a child. I'm not trying to say that. But at least it can be a seed of healing. When I hear children talk about their pre-death visions, oftentimes sort of intermixed in the experience is a wonderful message of hope and reconciliation for their family. And let me tell you another reason I think it's important. What I've learned from studying these children is that comatose patients typically can hear what's going on around them. Now that's been completely, I was never taught that in medical school, that's for sure. And here's why it's important, is so oftentimes when we die, we don't just sort of die, but we're actually hooked up to life support machines for several days. And then life support machines are typically discontinued, sort of a joint decision between doctors and family. And I think that if we know that that person who seems comatose can still hear us, that's an opportunity to talk to them, to resolve some of the conflicts that we have. One physician friend of mine was telling me that he took that opportunity to tell his father that he loved him, and that my research was instrumental in getting him to understand that his father could actually hear him. And, and I just think that at least it's an opportunity to say goodbye.
As you talk about this subject, it's clear it's a subject of great passion to you. It's changed you. Studying this has changed
absolutely. You. It has really changed my whole perspective, even on medicine itself, I'll have to say. When I started my study, I was primarily involved in brain tumor research and in studying the effects of leukemia on the brain and the various drugs to treat it. And I really saw this near-death research as kind of an aside and not really very important, just sort of a fascinoma, something, interesting. But what I've come to understand is that the near-death experience, the way we look at that really mirrors the way our society treats death and dying. And I could see a lot of things that I've done wrong as a physician. That's all I can tell you. In my book, I don't talk about, you asked me about what my medical colleagues think. I don't talk about that. I just talk about, I know I have been very casual or flippant with patients at the bedside, or I have delighted in the medical technology and the ability to resuscitate dying patients, and have just, in a defensive way, just focused on all the nitty-gritty technological details. And I certainly know that I was guilty of not actually talking to people or talking to patients. And now I understand that they have something really to tell us, so we have something to learn from dying patients.
What remains to be studied?
What I'd like to know now, here's one girl said to me, after I, gave her the 2-hour grueling interview, I say to him, well, do you have any questions? And this little girl, 5 years old, she said to me, but was it real, Dr. Morse? Did it really happen to me? Well, that to me is a question I don't think medical science will answer. I don't know if when they say they're leaving their body and entering into a beautiful light, is that heaven or what? But what I want to study is the transformation that these experiences cause to children who've had them. Because if I can document that the near-death experience causes a real transformation, not only of values, but in the way a person is, their whole psychological profile, then I think that that's a big step towards establishing that these experiences are in fact real and are not in the same category as, somebody having a dream that they went to heaven. Certainly no one's going to say that you could have a dream about going to heaven and then be spiritually transformed, and yet we are finding that these children are truly transformed by this experience of light.
So, looking at your own experience as well, it seems like you've been transformed by it.
In many ways. Certainly I'm not afraid to die. I was in the airplane, when you're in a couple of weeks ago, and you know how when it starts having that bumpy shakes, and you're like, oh my God, this is it. And I was funny because just as quickly I thought to myself, or I heard myself thinking, so I'll find out what that light is all about. It's very different than usually I would have thought, oh my God, what's the family going to do without me, or whatever. And I was really puzzled by that, and that really made me understand that now I understand that when we die, we don't just sort of go into darkness, but there's a wonderful light waiting for us.
Dr. Melvin Morse, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me on Upon Reflection. Dr. Melvin Morse, his new book is called Closer to the Light, Learning from the Near-Death Experiences of Children.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.